Greetings, fellow thinkers and drinkers and fans of Black Sabbath. Not directly a Black Sabbath related video today. Well, it is related. Anybody who's seen my other Black Sabbath videos will know that I always had an admiration for Tony Martin, their most overlooked singer. Not only for his voice, his songwriting contributions, the songs they created, or the music in general they created with him in the band, but also his attitude, his professionality, shall we say, his professionalism. But ultimately, it's the music that one creates upon which one is judged. Now, his time in Sabbath spanned roughly 10 years, from the end of the Eternal Idol sessions, which I think was sometime in the summer of '87, through to his eventual official dismissal, which was, I think, sometime mid-'96. Although, as he said himself, it never actually was presented that way. How did he phrase it? The phone simply stopped ringing, and presumably the checks stopped arriving. Now, outside of Sabbath, Tony Martin's career has been largely studio-based. Not really here to do a biography on him at this point, but most of those recordings have been involved in various collaborations, some of which I will discuss separately. It's rather a large undertaking, and they are that numerous. But there are certain highlights in there that I would like to discuss at some future date. However, aside from all that, he did actually release 3 solo albums under his own name. Not a hell of a lot, really, is it? But I thought it might be interesting just to take a little look at them. Now, his first effort came after his initial dismissal from Black Sabbath in 1991, when Iommi, rather stupidly, disbanded a fairly successful, at least in musical terms, incarnation of the band, chasing the dollar with the return of Dio. It was a failed experiment. And it wasn't too long after they started working again with Dio that Iommi realized the error of his ways and tried to get Martin back, but a couple of things prevented that. The fundamental one would have to be that the record company had paid out a considerable advance for the next Sabbath album, under the understanding that a name vocalist would feature on it, and I think Iommi was given the option. Well, it's either Dio or it's Osborne, and Osborne wasn't going to participate at that juncture, so they had to knuckle down and try and make it work with Dio. Another conversation for another day. The other reason was that Tony Martin had signed a solo deal, which resulted in the record we are here to discuss. Released in 1992 to virtually no fanfare whatsoever, Back Where I Belong. Does one wish to read anything into the title? A little bit of background to this. Most of the songs are his own creation. He'd worked up the demos. He's a multi-instrumentalist, as we know by this stage, and he'd worked up the demos himself. But he was able to get a rather impressive array of guests to appear on the album, such as Brian May, Jeff Nichols, Neil Murray, Cozy Powell, Lawrence Cottle, Zach Starkey, Nigel Glockler, and a few more whose names I didn't note down. Obvious connection to Black Sabbath with some of them. Even Brian May featured on Headless Cross. Well, yeah, an impressive array of guest musicians. It's a point I will get back to later when I've actually discussed the songs on here. I'm uncertain at this point, because as far as I know, he hasn't publicly expressed an opinion, or his opinion, or his intention at this point. What exactly the artistic vision behind this album was. Well, it opens up with a song, If It Ain't Worth Fighting For, and it isn't. Which is, I'm afraid, a plodding mid-paced rocker, not exactly heavy. Big chorus. Very keyboard heavy. Think Def Leppard sort of thing. Yeah, a lot of style, well, some style at least, very little substance. I believe it features a sax solo. Not the most promising start. Well, okay, we move on. If it ain't good enough, it ain't good enough, which does at least feature a nice, quirky guitar riff. Somehow reminds me of Whitesnake. I don't know why. I couldn't point to a particular song. Maybe it's just the feel, the vibe. I don't know. But despite this, it soon descends into generic AOR blandness. Really is. It's a bit of a non-event of a song. Though in hindsight, I have to say, it is perhaps one of the stronger efforts. If There's a Heaven was the single, if I recall correctly. And it sounds like the single. It's getting dangerously close to that soppy power ballad territory. It really is. Big chorus, lots of keyboards. Again, little substance to this. But yes, and it does feature the majority of the tropes one would associate with those cliched-ridden power ballads of the time. It's a decent effort, however, I'll be honest. Okay, we move on to Back Where I Belong. This being the title track, one always hopes, for a little something. And true enough, it does have more substance to it, and it's actually certainly one of his better vocal performances on the album. But again, it does plod a little bit. I have to say, it's a touch uninspired. Had this been the commercial effort, shall we say, on an otherwise decent album, this song would probably be looked at, or I at least would look at it in a more positive light. However, yeah, it's just much of the same. Which takes us on to Ceasefire, which is a fairly innocuous instrumental. It is about 30 seconds or something, I think, which serves as nothing more than an intro to Why Love. Oh dear. Again, I have to say this is not great. It is a typical vacuous power ballad of the time. Or perhaps not even of the time. Perhaps it had already passed its sell-by date by 1992. As we know, the rock world was changing. And I have to, it pains me somewhat to say, but this could have been done by any manner of, fairly middle-of-the-road AOR band. It's paint-by-number structures, it's sentimental cliches in the lyrics, vocals a little overwrought. This is musical wallpaper. And that sort of English wallpaper that, for some reason, thankfully the rest of the world never really got into. Anybody? I'm sure somebody will know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Okay, we move on to Sweet Elise, which at least rocks. It's got some tempo to it. It has some drive. It has it's a faster track. Again, a nice riff. Although it's not quite as frenetic, it does recall, at least to my mind, the Eternal Idol outtake, Some Kind of Woman. Okay, unfortunately, it's still a little generic, but I have to say, yeah, I like it, compared to everything else. The Last Living Tree is unfortunately a return to the power ballad. Not quite as generic and flaccid, one has to say, as Why Love, but the words Bon Jovi outtake do spring to mind. A little harsh, perhaps, but this is a competent rather than inspired effort. Now You Are Gone which I'm afraid is just more of the same. Although on this occasion there is a little bit more musical muscle to it. And in what is a relatively weak field, this is one of the stronger efforts. India. Again, at least, if nothing else, it ups the tempo. It does have potential. One clearly hears that. But that's always a precursor to saying but. And the but on this occasion is one does feel it could have benefited from more work being done on it. Certainly more development. Certainly a better production, although I don't want to get ahead of myself. Could have been more than a decent track. And somewhere during this track, slightly low in the mix, there is a guitar refrain which sounds very much like Burn from Deep Purple. Okay, Angel in the Bed, it's actually awful. This is a very generic effort. Imagine all the negative tropes associated with bland AOR. Yeah, I need say no more. Okay, The Road to Galilee next is a Jeff Nichols instrumental. It's 90 seconds roughly. And it's actually rather good. It's got a nice ominous feel to it, reminiscent of The Gates of Hell from the Headless Cross album. Perhaps a little too reminiscent. But having said that, it's still very possibly the best thing on the album. Excuse me, once again, at least thus far. And the album closes with Jerusalem, where he covers the song they recorded on the Tear album with Black Sabbath. It's a fairly faithful cover, I have to say. Keyboards are slightly higher in the mix. Certainly his best vocal performance on the album. And it's not a bad effort, although one has to say that hearing this version, it does just bring home the point how unique and perhaps indispensable Tony Iommi is as a guitar player. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly who played on this track, but with all due respect. And that was that. I have to say, when I bought it, I was incredibly nonplussed by it. It didn't, I don't know what I was expecting, but I certainly wasn't expecting this. And I rarely played it. It suffers from many things, but it suffers from a very sort of 80s, early 90s AOR production. It's radio-ready sheen sprayed on the top of it, often done to conceal a lack of substance, and I think that has to be said in this case. The guitar tones are too glossy, I think. The drums are don't sound particularly organic, very restrained. It could hardly be more of its time AOR in terms of production. Too clean, too polished, too radio-friendly to a fault, I'd have to say. Everything is tidy, it's well-balanced, you can hear just about everything, I think. But it's just that very neatness, if you want. It just robs the songs of, any grit or, any bite, any balls, whatever they may have had. And certainly any heaviness they may have had at whatever stage of their development. I said the guitars are too smooth, the drums lack impact, they lack punch. It's a professional production, but it's a little bloodless, I have to say. Typical of its time. In terms of the songs, they've gone for hooks over heaviness and substance. Well, he has. He wrote it all himself, mostly, I think. Choruses are plenty, but they lean towards this melodic catchiness, which is, a defining feature of this, syrupy AOR type music, which I'm not particularly keen on. So it's an emphasis on melodic catchiness, shall we say, rather than some real weight, some real riff-driven weight or musical dynamic weight behind it. It's unfortunate, shall we say. But I don't know. He has an impressive array of guests on this record, and the association with let's say particularly Jeff Nichols, who I think was quite involved, at least in the recording of this. Probably explains why the keyboards are so prominent, shall we say. It's very different from what he was doing with Black Sabbath. Which brings me back to a point I made at the beginning: is that, I'm uncertain as to what his intention or what his what his philosophy was when writing and recording this. Was he trying to distance himself from Black Sabbath? Well, if that was his intention, then on that level he most certainly succeeded. There is nothing, apart from the cover of Jerusalem, there is nothing here, absolutely nothing whatsoever reminiscent of Black Sabbath. Maybe he wanted to show that he could do, lighter, more varied material, perhaps. I don't know. More accessible material, more melodic material. Maybe this was record company pressure. We just don't know. I mean, he was the singer of Black Sabbath at the time, but unfortunately, as we know, that wasn't, that wasn't the career-making move it was for Dio back in the beginning of the 80s. It may have been that because of that, he got a record deal on the understanding that he did what he was told. I don't know. That's pure speculation. It may have been his personal taste. He maybe felt more comfortable doing that type of music than, the more overtly Sabbath style. I don't know. It's possible that it's one of the things that it may have been more successful had it been released a few years earlier. It's just as Dehumanizer actually did not set the world alight, but again, that's another conversation. This is one of those things. If this had come out 4 or 5 years earlier, it may have caught on more. I just don't know, but I think there were a lot of things against it. One, I don't think it's very good. Two, I think that type of music in the rock metal world was already passé, wasn't it? I mean, grunge was rewriting the rule book at that time. And again, that's something that affected Black Sabbath even. It may have been record company. It may be a combination of all those factors. It may be none of them. We just don't know. And unless Tony Martin himself actually makes a statement on this, I don't suppose we ever will really know. It just seems it was very much the wrong record at the wrong time. From a business point of view, as I've already said, I don't think it would have been a good record at any time. I just don't think the songs stand up. And certainly the recording and the production don't help. Interesting thing, his own vocal performance, I have long lauded him for his contributions to Black Sabbath, that operatic wail he had. And he also had that deeper menace. He could do everything, and especially live. He was by far the most effectual Black Sabbath singer. He did the Osborne stuff perfectly, something Dio rarely managed to do. And he did the Dio stuff. It was almost second nature to him, and obviously, he was very comfortable with his own stuff. He's still a powerful singer. Still can display the range, the control. The sheer strength of his voice is still very much intact. But it is less distinctive than it was on those Black Sabbath albums. Judging his performance purely on this record, one would have to say that away from the dark, dramatic, operatic, melodramatic, if you want, atmosphere that was created on those Sabbath albums, it sounds a little generic. I hate to say it. Maybe just that theatricality, those the ominous riffs, the gothic atmosphere, was just the foundation he needed to really, give full expression to what is an absolutely fantastic voice. I don't know. I really don't know. Not that he sings badly on it, but it's just, I have to say, he still sounds like a top-class vocalist, which he is. but he's not as distinct on this album. I'm not saying it could be any excellent AOR singer. I'm not saying that. But he does lose something of his distinctiveness, and it's noticeable. Well, okay, so what do I think of it? It's decent but disappointing, but it's certainly disappointing, but I'm struggling to say it's decent. I don't know if it proved anything either. Did it prove he could carry an album on his own? Well, I suppose it did in some ways, but again, the quality of the strength of the material wasn't just there, was it? And again, his name, when Dio left Sabbath in 82, 83, whenever it was, they were, riding the crest of the wave. And that certainly gave impetus, to his subsequent solo career, until that itself ran out of steam several years later. But that wasn't the case for Martin. Sabbath were at a fairly low ebb in commercial terms, shall we say, or in terms of widespread acclaim and popularity. So it didn't, being the singer of Black Sabbath, didn't have that cachet, shall we say. But fundamentally, it's just too generic. The songs are a little uninspired. Again, one could argue perhaps that given more time, or perhaps there are some good ideas that with the help of additional musicians could have been fleshed out into something, but we're getting into the counterfactual here. You can only judge the album as it is, the way it was released. As I said, it was a badly timed release. It really was. And again, whether this was his idea, this was record company pressure, I suppose we'll ever know. Difficult to know. If he'd come out with something more modern sounding, more aggressive, maybe it would have caught on better. I don't know. As we'll see as we go through, looking at his subsequent efforts, he certainly had that in him. He most certainly did. But this is a poor effort. And I'm a fan of Tony Martin. I make no bones about it. This is a poor effort. And there's very little positive to be said about it. The songs are not great. The production's awful. The timing sucks. Well, sucked. And this is one of those things, if I was being evangelical about these things, which I never am, but if somebody said, present me with a record demonstrating all the attributes of Tony Martin to justify your opinion of him, this would not be the record I would provide them with. Most certainly wouldn't. In fact, I would be hiding it. I'm so glad he returned to Black Sabbath. Now, that is my opinion on that, the first of his 3 solo albums. As I said, there's a whole catalogue of collaborations about which I would be far more positive, and I will be when I get around to discussing them. But this is the first installment of 3 discussing, as I said, purely his 3 solo albums. Now, there's a 17-year gap until we get his next one, which is Scream. But you're going to have to wait till the next video to find out what I think about that one. So, in the meantime, please feel free to like, to share, to comment, to subscribe, and all those good things. And, as always, I thank you for your indulgence. I wish you well. And until next time, Maçhonquèrre.